Good afternoon. Rich Nass with Open Systems Media here for this week's edition of 5 Minutes With. This week, I'm speaking to Terry Dunlap, who is the founder and CEO of Tactical Network Solutions. Good afternoon, Terry. How are you?
I'm doing excellent and getting better. How about yourself, Rich?
I'm doing pretty well myself. Thank you very much. So, Tactical Network Solutions focuses on IoT security. There's lots of people who focus on IoT security, and unfortunately, there's lots of people who focus on the other side, trying to break your security. So, first question: I'm sure your folks are really smart, but what makes you think that you're smarter than the bad guys?
Well, that really depends on your perspective, given our background and where we come from. If you are a foreign country, we were probably the bad guys against you at one point. What you got to understand is that we came from the National Security Agency. The entire company is former NSA. So we know what it takes and how sophisticated some of the state-sponsored actors could be and are, because depending on your perspective, we were one of them. So we're not smarter than the bad guys, but I think we play on the same playing field and are pretty well equipped to go head-to-head with these guys.
You said the whole company is former NSA?
Correct, except for my admin and my marketing person. Everybody else is NSA, former NSA.
That's pretty interesting. What were some of the roles over there?
Everybody was involved in one way or another with the offensive cyber operations that used to be part of the now old TAO organization. Now that has been publicly revealed by Mr. Snowden, I'm free to say that, yes, we all worked for TAO at one point in our past.
So if you stole all the people from the NSA, who was running the NSA?
That's a good question. I don't know. I'm sure they backfilled those positions, I'm sure. But yeah, there's still talented people there. There's no doubt. But when I started the company 10 years ago, back in 2007, I started slowly, picking those that I thought had the skill sets to, turn our knowledge around from attacking and infiltrating and implanting these devices to a more commercial bent, which is, we know these devices are vulnerable, and why can't we use what we know for good and actually help, manufacturers, help consumers, and create a better and more secure IoT universe? So we've been going down that path with our training and our products. It's a long, slow process, but nonetheless, we're getting our name and reputation out there, and we feel pretty good about what we do. And it's as you know, and the people listening to this understand, IoT security is hot. It's a big thing right now. You can't go, a couple days without seeing some type of breach or vulnerability or DDoS or some type of botnet that is, leveraging IoT.
Yep. Okay. However, what I find in my experience is that a lot of the hacks that we're seeing are things that are really hard to combat because they're human error. They're end users who just refuse to protect themselves or have vulnerabilities that they're not aware of. What do you do about that? If something that you may or may not have access to.
Well, here's how our approach is different, and why the intelligence community, the military, the government contractors, and within the past year and a half, the Fortune 500 have come to us. It's because our unique perspective, where we find the problems to begin with and our solution to fix those problems. You're right. There's a lot of user problem out there in terms of, not applying patches, doing updates, clicking on links they shouldn't click on. We try and educate the marketplace that, look, why can't we fix this problem at the source? Let's put an end to all this endpoint security. Let's do it before it even goes to production. That's where we fit into the scenario. So let's say you're a firmware developer. Maybe you're Linksys, you're D-Link, TrendNet, Netgear, or any other IoT-type device that's out there. Hopefully, if your firmware developers are writing their source code, they're using some type of code auditing solution. There's a number of suppliers out there that check your source code to make sure you're using secure coding practices. However, I don't think that's always the case, because one of our tools, what we're able to do, is take a compiled firmware image, and you can find many of these on these vendor websites that I just mentioned. You can download these compiled firmware images just like an attacker would, just like we used to do. Download that compiled firmware image, drop it into one of our tools, and it will unpack that firmware, break out the file system, examine every executable binary, look for vulnerabilities, and show us where the exploits are, or could be. So what we find in most cases are coding errors that we thought were fixed back in the 90s. Very simple, low-hanging fruit, and it all stems to insecure coding practices. So going back to the original scenario of these firmware developers, source code, they should be using these other tools in the marketplace to check the validity of their secure coding practices. They're obviously not doing it because we see these low-hanging fruit, very simple buffer overflows, command injection type attacks that can be easily exploited by some script kiddie, 13 years old, sitting in his mom's basement. And he doesn't have access to the source code, but he can download that latest Linksys firmware and reverse engineer it with open source tools and find the exact same stuff that we find. So what we propose is to use our solutions in that production process, that software development life cycle. So even if they are using some of these code auditing tools, once you compile that binary with third-party, whether it's open source or private libraries, who's checking that compiled firmware image just before it goes to the production line? Nobody. But had you taken a number of those IP cameras or IoT devices that were part of that botnet recently and dropped those firmware images into our platform, Centrifuge, you would be able to see that that code is indeed insecure. And you could go back to your developers, or you could go back to your outsourced team, wherever you have it developed, and tell them, hey, this particular executable in the firmware is susceptible to a remote attack. Fix it before we actually go to production. And that's where we fit into the picture. So we think we can nip the problem in the bud before it even gets into the marketplace.
Very cool. And that's a bright light at the end of a very dark tunnel.
Yes.
Our 5 minutes are up. I'd like to thank you for joining me this week. That was Terry Dunlap. He's the founder and CEO of Tactical Network Solutions. And I'm Rich Nass for Open Source Media. Thank you, Terry. Have a great day.
Thanks. You too, Rich. Take care.